Okay, let's get started. Sorry, but that had a technical hitch with the Wi-Fi again, Vodafone. There's still a few people wanting to come in. If I'm going to admit the last couple of people after that, if anybody else is trying to get in, I won't be able to let you in. However, these presentations are available on our YouTube channel, so you can always go back, subscribe to the channel, and keep up to date with all our webinars. So Mahabharata Decoded, it's a question or a subject area that a lot of people have asked me about, whether we Ramayana Decoded would ever go ahead and hold on, there's somebody in here again who's making pictures over the presentation. This has happened before, and the last person's identity was passed on to an organization. This person who's also now making these images on my screen, your details will also be getting passed on. So congratulations to that. Whoever that was, they can please leave the room. If you can't respect scriptures from any cultural or religious background, then you clearly are not, you're not welcomed here. And your identity will be passed on. I have got your details, so don't think that this will be the end of it. Anyway, Mahabharata Decoded. It's a subject area which I said a lot of people have asked me about over the last few years, whether we would ever do Mahabharata Decoded. And it's something that's always been in the background. Now, the way to look at these scriptures is that, in particular, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, the way to look at them is on three different levels. So this slide here is just basically showing who we are, Ramayana Decoded, and what we do. And in order for us to bring this whole kind of message out about how these scriptures have been written by the rishis of ancient India, we offer free Instagram posts which you can follow. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. I do these free live webinars on a weekly basis nearly. We do offer the Kriya Yoga lessons, which is a combination of kind of personal development, NLP or neuro-linguistic programming, with the whole Kriya Yoga meditation. And those are available by donation only, whatever it is that you want to donate. Then there is also the WhatsApp group. We're not really taking anybody into that at the moment due to admin time that I have to devote to this. I don't have much of that now. And I'm writing a book which should be available to you digitally towards the end of this year. Okay, so like I said, the Mahabharata Decoded is a very interesting subject, and you've got to look at both the Ramayana and the Mahabharata as two separate leelas, or two separate cosmic dramas which the rishis had compiled. And every scripture, and I've said this in a previous webinar, is written on three different levels of interpretation. So for example, that person who was writing on my screen thinks it's really funny. They will be at a lesser stage within their spiritual development and self-awareness. And that more or less falls into the Adipodhik, the very first level, which everybody falls into. It's basically the literal interpretation. It's the story. It's something that people take literally because their mind has not yet developed. So in our day and age, it's kind of very much well accepted, maybe not so much within the mainstream, but certainly through social media, that an individual's physical age can be very different to their self-awareness or their soul age, as a lot of people within the spiritual community call or name it as. Then you move into the Adidevik, which is the astral kind of subtle energies. From a more scientific point of view, it's more kind of subtle energies. It's more what's happening within creation and what modern day scientists are kind of alluding to with regards to the sutras and the shlokas of ancient India. And then there is the atomic, which is the actual practice of these techniques. And the reason why at the atomic level, a lot of people don't really get into it or go into that spiritual path is a conversation that I have individually with students who want to learn this, but really it's to do with, moving the mind from what we call Ved towards the actual practice. When you no longer want the knowledge, then you do the actual practice. I was quite fortunate that when I started this, I started off with the practice before I was ever introduced to Vedic scriptures. And I remember 25 plus years ago, having this ambition of I'm going to read all the Vedas and every scripture out there. That's just virtually impossible. The best advice given to me was, in order to understand anything, what you have to do is develop your intuition, develop your self-awareness and your consciousness, and focus your mind. Then you're in a position to pretty much pick up any book, any scripture, and be able to see beyond the literal interpretation. So when we look at the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, we can also associate to two different kind of naris as well. The Ramayana is more associated with what we call the Surya, the sun. The Mahabharata more with Chandra. Now, in the Mahabharata, what's interesting, and my guru has taught me this. So my guru who teaches me, keeps me in line with Vedic astrology. He said to me last week when I spoke to him about this presentation, he said, "Do you know that the first word and the last word of the Gita is Mama Dharma, which means my duty?" And that makes a lot of sense because the Mahabharata, particularly the aspect of it that is communicated through social media and through the media, is all about the war between the Kauravas and the Pandavas, and it's a war of dharma. It's a war of what we call conventionally as righteousness. But our perception of righteousness as individuals is very different to the next person, very different to your own family members, very different to even your twin, if you have a twin. And if you take that same concept and put it at a community level or a national level or a global level, everybody's perception of righteousness is very different. And the key of understanding what dharma is the knowledge and the wisdom which Krishna had passed on to Arjun on the battlefield. And I'm going to talk about that from an internal, so from the Adidevic point of view, as well as the Adhyatmic point of view. So as we know, the whole Mahabharata kind of started off from this game of chess. And that game of chess, in a very kind of literal interpretation, is the type of game that we play in life. Life is a game. Go ahead and play it. And one of the very first conversations that kind of led to the Mahabharata was the conversation between King Drishtarashtra and Sanjay. And he's asking Sanjay, as Pandavas and the Kauravas are about to battle on the battlefield, he's asking Sanjay, what is it that's happening on the battlefield? And Sanjay, through remote viewing, if you want to call it, but through the third eye, is able to see exactly what's happening on the battlefield. And this is what's happening on the battlefield. So what we've got to look at is that this battlefield is known as Dharmakshetra, Kurukshetra. And when you break down the Sanskrit of any word, and you've got to look at Sanskrit words as spiritual formulas, which you break down to come to the deeper meaning and understanding, then with a developed wisdom and intuition, in line with what the rishis and the Vedas are saying, you start coming to a more pure, intelligent, discriminative way of kind of understanding it. However, when you break down Dharmakshetra, Kurukshetra, ultimately it means the battle that you fight on the holy plane, which is your body and your mind. It's how your consciousness starts regaining control over your own kingdom, which is your body and your mind. And how you do that internally is what's encoded into the Mahabharata by Rishi Vyas. And it's basically, on a very basic level, you can talk about it from the point of view of Buddhi, as in the Pandavas, or from the point of view of Manas, as in Drishtarashtra. Hence why Drishtarashtra is blind, because we say that the senses are blind. Your five senses are actually blind because you are only ever experiencing a very small fraction, depending on where you get the source of information from about 0.04 to about 4% of the actual reality which is out there. This is where we start talking about the Davic level of interpretation, those very subtle energies within creation, which science is now slowly beginning to discover. Historically, it was always about electrons, protons, and neurons back in the mid 90s through the kind of educational school system. But now, as we've progressed over the last couple of decades, there are various other energies, and these energies are the energies that Krishna was speaking to Arjuna about on the battlefield. But he was doing this in a dharmic way. And I want to come on to the point about what dharma actually means with regards to Vedic scriptures or with regards to creation in general. Let's do that. This is just a chronology of the the characters or the individuals which are involved in the Mahabharata. And a really important part of this, and I'm going to go into it in a little bit more detail soon, is around Ganga and what Ganga actually means and how it all connects from universal creation point of view, how these different energies all link together. So if you're looking at this just from the literal interpretation or the adibotic level of interpretation, all you're really seeing are characters within the drama with these particular names. But then when you take these particular names, these Sanskrit names, and you strip away the literal interpretation and dig deep into what these Sanskrit words actually mean, you start coming to the Adidevic, which is various different types of energies which are controlling or transducing from one form of energy to another within creation. You see, when the rishis had to communicate this very deep spiritual esoteric message, they also knew, and I went through this in my yoga cycle presentation, they had to find a way of taking this very deep scientific knowledge and processing it and delivering it in such a way that it would become part of an individual's life. And the best way to do that, and this is a great marketing technique, the best way to do that is to tell a story, which is exactly what they did. So talking about names and scientific meanings, this is just a snapshot of the types of names or the names that are within the Mahabharata. And I'm just going to give you about a minute or 30 seconds just to have a look through that. So I'll keep this up on the screen, but I will discuss it. So over here on the far left, we've got the main kind of characters that everybody knows about. Obviously, Krishna is known the world over by everyone that I've ever come across. Even those who don't really have an interest in Vedic scriptures will know or has heard of the name Krishna. And you can start relating these Sanskrit terms to the more kind of subtle interpretation of the Vedas. So Krishna represents the Agna Chakra, Yudhishthir Vishuddhi, Bhim Anahata, Arjun Manipur, as is Ram representing Manipur. You see, the stories are very different, and therefore their interpretation of the way you explain the Vedic science is very different as well in some aspects. Nakul and Sahadev, Savastadhan and Maladhura as the Ashwin twins. And then we kind of go into the more kind of, the Kunti mantras and why she pronounced those mantras and what those mantras actually mean. So Yudhishthir is dharam, pure intelligence. And pure intelligence is about doing things in a dharmic way rather than in a way that you think is righteousness. And I'll give you an example of that just now. So in the Mahabharata, certainly in the one that I remember watching from back in the early 90s, is there's a situation where Yudhishthir and Duryodhan are asked, after they had come out of their schooling, they were asked a question on how to deal with a Brahmin and a Sudra, and because they had done something which was against the law of the land. I need everybody to mute themselves, otherwise I can hear you. So they were asked to make a judgment call on how to deal with these two individuals. I think one was a Brahmin and one was a Sudra. And Duryodhan, don't forget, Duryodhan represents the is born from the blind sense mind from Drishtarashtra. Duryodhan's name is difficult or conflict, so difficult confliction, and represents anger and growth, and it represents being attached to Maya. Yudhishthira, on the other hand, represents pure intelligence, and the response that Duryodhan gave was very different to the response that Yudhishthira gave. So Duryodhan's response was that they should be sentenced to death, and because they have gone against the laws of the land of the kingdom. Whereas Yudhishthira's response was very different. He had said that the Brahmin should be given a more severe punishment than the Sudra, because the Brahmin is more developed spiritually and has more wisdom and is more capable of understanding things dharmically than is the Sudra. Whereas the Sudra, it's more of an educational gap there. They have to be educated, they have to be given the opportunity to develop spiritually. And that is what dharma is. And that is what Krishna was teaching Arjun on a very kind of, let's say, basic level of the Mahabharata, on how to perform, how to bring balance back into the universe, into the nation, into the kingdom, into yourself dharmically. And that does not always mean that you do things which are right in the eyes of everybody else around you. Let's move to the next one. So there was a lot of things that happened on the battlefield that Krishna had asked Arjun to do, which went against battlefield rules, as well as it went against what we would consider as dharma. And I'll go into that. Let me just check the next slide. Okay. So let me just go into this one first then. So on the battlefield, fighting Bhisham, Pitama was the most difficult character, or the most difficult warrior on that battlefield to fight against. No one could really beat him at anything. And the reason for that is when you look at the word Bhisham from the spiritual interpretation, from the Devic level of interpretation, it actually means ego, but it's a different type of ego. It's this what we call abhasakatayani, which is the reflected consciousness of pure spiritual consciousness. So when the Mahabharata, Ganga gives birth to 8 sons, and out of the 8, only Bhisham is allowed to remain alive. Those 8 are known as God's intelligences. 3, which overlook as we've got here, 1 to 3 govern the macro universe, 4 to 6 govern the micro universe, 7 universal consciousness, 8 reflected consciousness of spirit. This one, the ego, remains within creation. And when your soul comes under the influence of chit or feeling as it's developing, what happens is it comes under the influence of this ego, and that ego becomes really difficult to destroy. And there's 3 different types of ego. There's physical ego, there's astral ego, and there's spiritual ego. And we refer to Bhisham Pitama as spiritual ego, which is why he was so difficult to fight and so difficult to beat on the battlefield. And even when he was taken down, as this picture alludes to, even then he had said that I am only going to die when this battle is over. I'm only going to die when the sun rises to the north. So even though Krishna and Arjun had very cleverly managed to pin him down, what that's actually representing from an Adi Atmic, Adi Devic level of interpretation is when you're practicing Kriya Yoga and you're able to lift the Kundalini up through the Shushumna and place your consciousness on the Kutasa, the point between the eyebrows, you go into Samadhi. And then what happens is that we call it Sivikalpa Samadhi, which is self-realization. But at that point, you, based on your karam, can also come out of that experience or that bliss. based purely in your karma. You can remain within samadhi for many months. You can remain within samadhi for just a few seconds. You can remain within samadhi for a few nanoseconds as well. And the only way then to go to nirvikalpa samadhi is to take the point from the north, uh, from the south up to the north. So by that, what I mean, if I just put that dot there on Grishan, that there represents self-realization. When Bhisham Pitama said, "I will die," the ego will die, the spiritual ego will die when when the sun rises to the north, which is the Sahasrara. That is the spiritual interpretation of what that actually means. So there are many characters within the Mahabharata. Sorry, I think I might have said Ramayana. There are many characters within the Mahabharata, and we could do a whole series of webinars on this. And if you guys are happy and you want to, I can do this on a weekly basis or a 2 weekly basis and go through the different characters. And what we could also do is apply this to Patanjali's Yoga Sutras with regards to the Kaleshis and how those characters represent those different types of Kaleshis. What you've got to understand is that these stories, first and foremost, and a lot of people have asked me this for some reason, I for some reason believe that these are just stories and they're not real events. I have never actually said that. As a matter of fact, I do believe, and I have come across in my research over the last 2.5 decades of information which alludes to that these events actually happened. But then if you take a look at this also from a deeper spiritual perspective and from a yogic cycle perspective, these have happened. If you look at it from a common sense perspective, and common sense is not very common, these stories cannot remain alive and fresh within our minds for so many thousands and thousands and thousands of years if there was nothing within them. If these had actually never happened, they'd just be another story that would come and go, and that would be it. But they're here, and they've been here for thousands and thousands of years, and they will remain for thousands of years. So I've only got about 5 minutes left or so. And I want to very quickly just go through the very last slide, which is this one, about winning at life dharmically. Now, this whole concept of dharma is taught within the Kriya Yoga lessons. So, like the Ramayana, the Mahabharata is a whole entire process internally of how you start expanding your consciousness, start expanding your awareness, focusing your mind, going from concentration into meditation, going from dharana into dhyan and into samadhi. And how you do that internally, which we in the Vedas and kind of Hindu culture or Vedic culture, we call it yajna, the internal battle, the internal kingdom, the spine and the brain, which is where all this entire process actually starts from. So this whole concept of dharma is taught within the Kriya Yoga lessons, and we talk about what dharma actually means and the way it was communicated on the battlefield of Dharmakshetra, Kurukshetra. And the Mahabharata, the Gita, kind of explains that, I'd say, if I am allowed to say, in a more clearer way than it does in the Ramayana. The Ramayana is an internal process of Kriya Yoga, whereas the Mahabharata is more of how you go through life dharmically. And like I said at the beginning, that everybody's interpretation of dharma comes up with one word. It means righteousness. But your experiences in life and your events are based on you and not any other individual. This is why within the kind of corporate world, with personal development and personal growth, we have this saying that the opinions of other people are the cheapest commodities on the marketplace, because those opinions are based on their experiences, based on their events. Then you've got to consider that individual, nation, group, or community. Does their mind or their collective mind, is it more with buddhi or is it more with manas? And again, that can be brought back to kind of personal development. If you've ever read the book a chimp paradox. The author talks about the lymphic system and the human part of the brain. So the lymphic system of the brain represents Drishtarashtra, Manas, and the human part of the brain, the prefrontal lobe, represents Buddhi or pure discrimination. And that's also the point where the Agna Chakra sits between the eyebrows, where you have to totally focus your consciousness and your awareness to that one dot between the eyebrows. In order to do things dharmically, you've got to understand how dharma actually works. So you've got to understand, first of all, the whole purpose of creation, and the whole purpose of creation in every individual's ultimate goal through life's journeys is to find their way back to the original source, to transcend their consciousness and their awareness away from this body, which is only to be used as a temple to expand the consciousness and focus the mind and lift the kundalini up into the sahasrara, eventually for nirvikalpa samadhi. That is the ultimate goal. Now, when you are preventing an individual or a group of people or a nation or a community from doing that spiritually in a humane way, you are going, what you're performing there is adharam. What you've also got to understand is that the whole of creation is built on this whole concept of duality. There's one, there's also another. And the only way to bring things into balance is to know and understand how to play with both sides. Because the devas and the asuras, which is the language that we use in the kind of Vedic culture, Vedic literature, is like the good and the bad. But the thing with the asuras is that they love change. They don't really like consistency. They love change. Asuras love change. But you can't have consistent change. And again, in kind of the corporate world, for personal development at a company level, individual level, it's always advised, and Henry Ford was very good at this, it was always advised to make changes slowly, to make big changes, but make them slowly. Whereas the devas, they love consistency, but you can't have consistency all the time because you will never progress without change. But at the same time, you can't have too much change because that way you will also lose. So you're starting to see how you have to play with both sides. And when it comes to dharma, what it really means is what I just said. Dharma is any action or thought that you have that allows people to develop in a spiritual way. Now, sometimes you might come across a situation where you have to make a very difficult decision for your company, for example, or for your employees, which in the eyes of the people around you may come across like it's not the right decision to make, but you're making a dharmic decision. And organizations that go through restructure, for example, they make these decisions. Maybe they do it consciously, understanding dharma. Maybe they don't, but generally that's how it tends to work. Is that sometimes you have to perform what you could call a negative action in order to bring dharma back into balance. So, for example, in the Mahabharata, Krishna had asked Arjun to shoot the arrow when Karan was not on his chariot. That was against battlefield rules. They used mind control tricks with their own guru, Drona, by making him believe that his son Ashwadhama had died at another part of the battlefield. Drona then sits down in samadhi on the battlefield and they chop his head off. He's unarmed and he's in samadhi. How is that going with dharma? You've got to understand why they did this and how they did it. Not everybody can be Christian, but we can slowly start getting to understand what dharma and dharmashetra actually means in the Mahabharata. So that's the end of my presentation. If anybody has any questions, please let me know now, or as a lot of people like to do, is send them across to me in your messages. I will do this weekly.
Hello, sir. This is Heman Kushwa.
Hello. Hello.
Hello,
Hello?
hello.
Hello?
Hello.